Hello, friends, and welcome back to Heartscapes, where we are learning and practicing the system of Reiki at the intersection of self-reflection, spiritual practice, and social action. Welcome back. My name is Michaela, and I'm really happy to invite you back into this collaborative, ongoing conversation around the topic of integrity with my dear friend, Carrie of the Reiki Healing Society. Carrie, I wonder if you could just give us a quick introduction of the Reiki Healing Society, where you are in the world, and just maybe a one or two sentence introduction to your work.
Oh my goodness. Sometimes that's the biggest challenge for me because I tend to get a little wordy about who I am in my business, but
right. Precision, it's an art.
Well, my name is Carrie and I live in Northern California. I live right where the redwoods meet the Pacific Ocean. It's a magical place. I moved here a couple years ago with my family during COVID times, and we're super blessed to live in this part of the world. So Reiki Healing Society is a place where we can build community for Reiki practitioners. We can also collaborate and then work together to give back to causes that matter. And all of it is just a big umbrella that I bring, my heart and soul into, and my service for others and humanity. And that's my pathway to give. And that's really what I'm here to do in this life. And so I feel really honored to have Reiki, be the wind underneath my wings to really support me in that life mission. And
Yeah. So Carrie and I, those of you who've listened to my channel for a while, you can probably already see some of the points of commonality and the values sharing between myself and Carrie. And we've been having, these ongoing conversations about what does it mean to be a Reiki practitioner in this time, in these days, in this place as Americans. And what does it mean to do that in integrity? So this conversation that, has been happening informally between Carrie and myself for some time, and a little bit formally on the podcast that she and I co-host with Bronwyn Logan called Reiki Women, has really led us to wanting to do a little bit more of a deep dive, a specific conversation called Being True to Your Way, Navigating Integrity for Reiki Practitioners. And we really want to create a space where we, as a community of practitioners, can have some conversations that are sometimes challenging to have around what does it mean to be true to ourselves and to be true to this practice, to be true to the origins of this practice, and to be true to the expression of it in our communities and in our lives. And so we're going to be sharing this conversation over our two channels. You are watching this iteration of the conversation on my channel, Heartscapes Reiki, and the next version, the next video will be happening over on Carrie's channel, and we will link that down below. For this next step in the conversation, we wanted to begin with looking at what does it mean to have integrity inside of our Reiki practice for ourselves. So beginning from the premise that from the perspective of its origins, all Reiki is self-Reiki, that really what we are up to when we are in a Reiki practice, whether we are in the process of sharing it with another person or not, is being in a self-practice. Ultimately, this practice is about self-development. It's about spiritual growth for ourselves and the way in which we then bring that growth out into the world in various aspects of our lives. And so we felt it really important to begin there with what does it mean to have integrity inside of our self-practice. And as we said in the introduction video, part of that, even having this conversation requires us to look at the places on an ongoing basis, not just once, but on an ongoing basis, where maybe we haven't been in integrity. And so I just wanted to begin with, an awareness that I have that really where it begins is having a diligent, regular self-practice. And that is something that I have personally struggled with for a long time. I'm a person who tends to have a lot of different irons in the fire, and my attention gets pulled in a lot of different places. I like to have my hands moving all the time. And so really carving out the time to have an intentional, dedicated, consistent self-practice is an ongoing challenge for me. And at the same time, it's also the basis of having an integritous practice is committing my time to it. And so that's where I really want to begin, that we, whatever consistency means to us, that is what we want to be aiming for inside of our practice. And that's where integrity begins, is really the integrity with our own self, that if we're going to take something on that's meant to develop ourselves, to better ourselves, that we really want to commit a certain amount of time to it. And as I said, that's something that I continue to be aware of in myself can be a challenge, and so a place that I have to be diligent and I have to really pay attention to. One of the reasons that that's important is because we all, walk around with various forms of subconscious biases, traumas that have happened in our lives, belief systems that we might be holding that aren't necessarily benefiting ourselves or others, just shadowy places inside of our psyche, inside of our bodies, inside of the beliefs and the actions that we take in our life, that are really inviting us to take a look at them and to use a practice like Reiki and other practices to help to transform those places. And we can't do that if we're not making the time, right? And so, having integrity in my Reiki practice means really drawing on my practice to help me to take a solid look at myself and to continue that process of opening up places that I maybe have not wanted to take a look at in the past, places that I've looked away from, beliefs that I have, behavior patterns that I have that don't really benefit me or others, but that I lean on because of habit, because of wanting to keep myself safe or protected, or just not knowing any better, right? And so that's kind of what I wanted to name as our starting point in terms of having integrity for ourselves inside of our practice, is devoting the time, whatever that means to us, finding a rhythm that is sustainable for us, but then committing to that rhythm and doing that in service of self-development, of transformation inside of ourselves on an ongoing basis, not just one and done, like, oh, I did that work and now it's done, right? Our human soul needs to be cultivated over a longer period of time than that. And so, yeah, that's where I wanted to begin. And Carrie, I'm wondering what comes up for you when you think about what it means to have integrity in your self-practice.
Yeah. So integrity for self, I think, is really at the core of my spiritual practice. And it's taken me a long while to get there. And I think, our friendship, Michaela, has really helped me name something that you are so eloquent in speaking to, is just that when Reiki first initially came to me, it felt like it was the answer that could help me make a living doing something that I loved. And so it came to me, yes, like as a gift for myself, and a gift of like, this is truly how I want to put time and energy out there into the world. This is what I want to build my career on. And I've always done that kind of concurrently with yoga, as I've been a yoga teacher and a Reiki practitioner. And for the longest time, I was like, I want to be a yoga teacher. And that was kind of my dream. I always wanted that. And when I found Reiki, it was like, this was the thing. This was the thing that was actually going to help me do more yoga all the time, because I love those things. And I love Reiki. I love embodiment practices such as yoga. And so, kind of right from the offset, there was a little imbalance there, because these practices, they came to me, I feel so passionate about them, but it's taken me a while to really realize and recognize that the reason why I'm so passionate about them is because they're for me. And they're really like what I need for my soul's journey and my healing. And they're tools that support me to be who I am
Yeah.
And so there's a tendency to focus within Reiki on like really giving it to others, especially in the Western mindset around Reiki. And I think that, is a beautiful way, for people to make a living, for healers in particular to, bring what they have in their soul and the healing that they have to others. But yeah, it can be problematic when through the lens of Reiki and some of the language that we create around Reiki, we tend to dissect ourselves out of the healing. And I don't think that's always the case, because, there's certainly that concept within Reiki. It's like, both the healer and the recipient are deserving of Reiki. So there is that conversation kind of built into how we're giving Reiki. But some of the ways I think we tend to compartmentalize ourselves out of the practice by like, bypassing our ego or other ways, and not really recognizing how much our own internal energy really does matter when we're working with others. Um, so anyways, so to say that, like, so when I think of integrity, I really always has to come back to myself, because I talked about integrity being, me navigating my life based on my core values.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think sometimes the trouble that we can get into in the conversation around integrity is like, what's right for me is obviously right for somebody else. And that's actually out of integrity, is that because we have to like step back and recognize that like actually people are probably already living their life based on their core values and their integrity, and their integrity might look different, right? But there's times where they, we step on each other unintentionally or intentionally. And seen that a lot in my marriage. I gotta tell you, many times where what's right for him, not right for me. And we have to always navigate what works for you, what works for me. And, also adding our kids into the mix makes a big difference too. So when I come back to integrity, I always really want to be mindful of like not pointing the finger out at other people.
Yeah.
Um, but so I had an example of this recently. I had to leave a yoga studio that I was teaching at, and one of the reasons why I left the yoga studio is that they were not paying me enough money, like less than $15 to come and teach a 75-minute class. And as much as I tried to build that class up, it wasn't being built up. And so there's some issues overarchingly, and I could throw the finger and say, that studio not paying their teachers. And I got to tell you, I kind of threw that card out there, and it was probably a little bit of a lack of integrity for me, because, not everything in the world is built around integrity for me. But what I did find is, that culture and dynamic within the studio was that, men were typically earning more because everything was built around, the number of people moving through the classes in terms of the compensation. And of course, people of color were earning less, and of course, women were earning less. And where do we see that in society? It's like everywhere in society, right? And so sometimes in cultures of community, we really have to be mindful that integrity doesn't naturally arise, that like there are points of contact or points of conflict between different parties. And so, for me, the integrity was to name what I was seeing, to step out of that, and that can be a pretty painful process, and I think it kind of sent me spiraling through a lot of shame and guilt and judgment, and questions around my sanity and self-worth, which can happen sometimes, right? And so when we notice those edges of integrity, or the lack of integrity, whether it be for ourselves, in that sense, I had to have integrity with myself, like that my time was more meaningful or more valuable than what was showing up. And I really had to, put my foot down. I really had to stand up for myself. And in that process, sometimes it was painful. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
It was very painful. But that's some of what the spiritual process asks us to do, is to look at ourselves. And I think Bronwyn said this so beautifully in one of our podcasts. It's just like Reiki is a means and a way to look back at ourselves. And if our eyes are shining outwards, most of our senses are oriented about receiving what's happening in the world. That's the work of the spiritual process in my mind, is to look at ourselves, to turn our sensory awareness inwards, to look more mindfully at our own actions. I mean, because it's really easy for me to look at my husband's actions and be like, you don't do this, you don't do that, or this, that, or the other. It's more hard, it's more difficult for me to look at
Yeah,
my own actions and take responsibility for my own actions.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's really kind of tender for me that you started with the point around the impulse that many of us have, and I'm absolutely in this camp of coming to Reiki from the impulse of wanting to share with others, right? And that there's on the one hand a really, there's a beauty in that, right? It's there is a generous spirit that I know I felt when I stepped into that. But as I've been in reflection on this and, I've been more honest with myself, I'm aware that, almost 10 years ago now, when I began this journey, of learning Reiki, there was a way in which I was, wanting to help others as a way of avoiding working on myself. And there was a phrase that you used that was really beautiful that I'm not remembering exactly, but it was something about kind of keeping ourselves out of the equation. And I know that for me in that time, I was like, coming out of a really hard time in my personal life. And I really felt like if I can just help other people, if I can, you know, do this healing work with other people, then I'll feel better about myself. And if I can help other people around me feel better, then I'll feel better. And, there was a generous spirit in that, but there was also a spirit of avoidance of doing, more of my own internal work. There is also a spirit of a little bit of ego, wanting to be the one that was the helper and to be seen that way. Again, after a period of my life of really feeling very invisible in a lot of ways. So like it made sense in the scheme of what I was dealing with. But I'm so grateful looking back that I was able to see that dynamic and ultimately understand that Reiki is self Reiki. Like this is about turning towards ourself and transforming what needs to be moved out of the way so that we can be more true to ourselves, right? Be more true to our way, be more true to our being, move the things out of the way that are in the way of us truly being our full and true self. And that work is painful. It's difficult. You just mentioned shame. You just mentioned, guilt and, that difficulty of looking at ourselves. And I think when I entered into this practice, I really kind of had that it's all going to feel good, right? This is all going to be about feeling good, helping other people feel good, having beautiful experiences. And many of those experiences were that way. And, it came to the point where I really had to acknowledge that healing isn't always beautiful and that I had to really do that work with myself first, that if anything was going to get shared with other people, it had to come from doing that hard work myself. And as I said earlier, doing that hard work over time. And so, yeah, I really appreciate that you brought that perspective in, that there is a beauty in that impulse to want to help others. But part of being in integrity is to look at that and say, if it's only about that, is there something that I'm avoiding looking at for myself, or have I already done that work? So I really appreciate you bringing that perspective in. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if I could say one more thing about that, it's just that like I also heard it from a different lens. It's like if you are called to a certain practice, and I really felt the calling to Reiki. I really felt the calling to yoga, is to really name that at the core, it's for you. And I don't see a lot of that happening in mainstream Reiki, but I think because of the conversations that the really integrous conversations you're having, Michaela, and others are having, it's the conversation is shifting. So I think it's just important, for other Reiki practitioners, obviously, like we can't do this work for you. Integrity is such a deeply personal process, but the reason why we started with self is really to continuously come back to self, as we move on through these different topics and different layers of the way we can bridge integrity in our work with others and our work towards healing and mending the hoop of the people, through our own spiritual healing and healing practices that we share with others. I think it's just always so good to just always tether it back to oneself.
Absolutely.
And for Reiki practitioners just beginning out on their journey through Reiki, just giving yourself time. I think a lot of times tendency is like, oh, the pathway is open to Reiki and I can give Reiki and I can build a practice, and I can do this. And there's a lot of pressure to do it quickly. And that's not really part of the spiritual process either. It just takes
Yep.
time. It takes time of integration, learning these techniques, applying them in our lives, spending time with the precepts, carving out space for self practice. And I know for me, that time wasn't an issue. It became so all consuming, actually, this connection and building a reservoir between me and Reiki. And that was really where I went for like the first year when I first discovered Reiki. It's like I did it all the time. And now, 15 years later, I do struggle like you, like finding time for my practice and time for self-care. But it's always something that I don't have to worry about because it matters so much to me. It's so
Yeah.
meaningful for me to take that time for myself, at least a few moments a day, to center myself, to ground myself through the principles of Reiki. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's really the essence, is just like constantly coming back to ourself,
Yeah.
navigating that feeling of integrity, and bringing it back to being true to our way, and being true to our being. And if we make that commitment to do that every day, what is so beautiful and stress relieving about that is that we will find our path. Like, we will find our way, even when we feel lost or we're in really deep times of transformation or healing. If we just make those little efforts towards being true to what our calling is, we'll find a path, and
Yeah.
our work will resonate with others.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a really beautiful place of transition, because our next conversation in the series is going to be around having integrity with culture. And so turning from the self into the cultural context within which we live, the cultural context within which the system of Reiki was developed, the intersections between those things, right? And so beginning with that self practice and then turning outward towards the context within which we live and practice is going to be where this conversation goes next. And that leg of the conversation is going to happen over on Carrie's channel. We'll put the link to that down below. If you subscribe to both of our channels, you'll get notifications when these next ones come out. So we will put the links to Carrie's channel down below, and that video will be coming through in a week from the release of this video. And if, again, you subscribe to both channels, you'll get notifications when those come out. So we invite you to do that. So Carrie, thanks so much for taking this time. I'm so glad that we're getting this conversation recorded and out there, since we've been having it for so long, like kind of behind the scenes. It feels really good to just begin sharing this outward. So I look forward to the next installment, and we hope that all of you listening will join us as well and join in the conversation. Let us know what comes up for you around the concepts that we share and what questions come up. All right, so we will see you over on Carrie's channel next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.